Hello, and welcome to a slightly different background. You can't tell it from the angle because these shelves are the same, but the reason I haven't posted in the last month is because this flooring has been replaced and we got new bookshelves, and so everything has moved around ever so slightly in the background here, but things are very different elsewhere. That's a separate video for a different time, most likely on a different channel. But for now, I need to do my June wrap up because otherwise I'm never going to do it. And I read 7 books in June. It was a pretty weak month overall in terms of ratings. There's some hot spots in here. There are some real good reads, but yeah, it goes with the kind of territory this year that it's not exactly been the best reading year. The first book I read, and actually I pretty much read it throughout May and finished it in June, was Destiny Disrupted, A History of the World Through Islamic Eyes. I read this due to a channel and a name I don't even know, Michael something, and I just saw a short. I've been wanting to read more history and non-fiction. He's a good outlet for it. I genuinely don't remember off the top of my head, but it's okay because I'm pretty sure he has like hundreds of thousands of followers. It's not like I'm drawing away anything. And this was a very good book. It is, yeah, essentially a world history, but rather than focusing on the West, it focuses on what is referred to in this as the middle world. For someone who grew up, as I imagine the majority of us did, in a heavily Western influenced or just Western education system, I had no idea about a lot of these things. Or if it was an area that I was aware of, this went into greater detail than I was aware of. Essentially, the pitch of it is that it feels like you're sitting down with an old family member who's telling you this. It's not exactly a nitty-gritty historical account. The language is quite familiar. It has quite often little prods of humour, and there's a lot of familiarity from the author. And he describes it in the foreword basically as providing a basic understanding of what you would have just as a generic education in that area of the world. Things that the same way you grow up in Europe and you're aware of the kind of general movings and dealings and familiarity with the religions, etc., and the different sects. That's kind of what he's doing here. And there was a lot to learn and a lot of interesting things, especially early on when you're kind of following the foundings of Islam, direct descendants of the Prophet and the different families, that how those sects then moved into different forms of Islam. The things that, I'm aware of the terms of Sunni and Shia, but actually learning what they are and the differences of ideology is illuminating. And that's really what you're reading it for. And who would have thought that you read a non-fiction book to learn something? I would recommend it. Then we go to a slog of a book, hence why the area of this series got called the name The Slog. I read Crossroads of Twilight, and my good God, did it live up to its reputation. This was a 2-star. It was a 2-star by virtue of the fact that for the majority of it, like for the first half, I would say, it reads much like a Wheel of Time book. There's a lot of setup, it's very slow, very character-based, and I was into it. You know, it wasn't the most interesting elements of those characters. And then the book ends. It kind of does leave you in the position of being like, why did I just read this? Thinking back on it now, I'm like, what even happened? I won't lie to you, there were parts of this book that I did just skim read. Because The Wheel of Time is a series that I am fine with. It's never been one of my favourites. I do plan on finishing it, and people say that the next books are infinitely better. And with all of this, the idea people say nothing happens in it, there's no progression. I was just like, then why am I reading this? And how far can I skim read at a point? Go back in and go, nothing has just happened there. And I was able to do it quite a bit. Crossroads of Twilight, I mean, the Wheel of Time is good. I'm not going to have a hot take here saying the Wheel of Time is dog shit. I just think it is good though. I don't have this. I've said it before. I do think that the Wheel of Time is one of those series where I think growing up, having read it as a teenager, does a lot for you. It's like watching the prequels or something. Now the prequels I do think are dog shit, so that's different. Where I think you have to be brainwashed as a child to enjoy it in any way. But with this, I think that there's a lot of it that when you're a teenager, it could be elevated, and then when you reread it, you kind of can gloss over some of the weaknesses. Whereas when you read it for the first time as an adult, it's kind of like, damn, like this is good, but especially having read other things as well, that's always going to be the difficulty. You've read things that have been influenced by Wheel of Time, so not all of it feels as fresh as it would have at the time. So there's different aspects that are obviously affecting the reading experience, that's inevitable. But yeah, I feel like the further we get away from the Wheel of Time, the less the series will hold up as time goes on. I think it's just by the nature of his focus on gender dynamics that feel antiquated already. It nevertheless has its place in fantasy history that deserves to be there. And I will be continuing the series. I will probably read Knife of Dreams in like December to then hopefully have the last 3 books ready to go in 2026. But that seems like it's a slog done. Everyone says, including Grace, who's behind the camera right now, she can attest that Knife of Dreams is a great book, but also one of the best Wheel of Time books.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
What do you think, Maisie? I know. Following that, I read what has been a Discord darling, and as a result was something that I have wanted to pick up and read and finally did. Specifically championed by Anya and Kolu in the Discord. And that is These Burning Stars by Bethany Jacobs, which is book 1 in the Kingdom trilogy. And I think Grace was responsible for me reading this in a way, because I made like a list and you were like, you should read a sci-fi. I feel like you haven't, you've been reading sci-fi. And so, yeah, this was a lot of fun. Essentially, These Burning Stars is, what's the best way to describe it?
A book.
Interesting. And then we move on to the next one. Essentially, you're following a piece of shit in the best way. This series does morally grey in the best way, which is where they're not even morally grey. Some of them are just outright despicable people, and yet you are just salivating to hear what kind of despicable shit they're going to do next. The idea is that you're following, there's a few different characters, but Ezek is this essentially priest figure.
Take a shot every time you say essentially.
Essentially. It is this priest figure who, at the opening of the book, is visiting the school that they were trained at, and the idea is that they are not assigned gender, they're not given names, they are just there to learn, and when they graduate, that's when they're able to choose their own gender and choose their name, and begin their career path, essentially. Oh my god, I did it again. And the opening chapter is Ezek going to this school and being told, oh, you should come see this particular class fight. And she watches as they beat the shit out of each other. And there's a particular person in it who is referred to as 6, that's the number in the line they are, who is like kind of coy with their fighting, kind of reserved, and then they're referred to as just it as well. That's the other thing, they don't have pronouns other than just it. And so it is very reserved in its fighting, and then it just, when it's their turn, and that it's meant to kind of defend, instead it just goes for all the different people and it's just fighting everyone, and it's kind of controlled chaos. And Ezek is kind of drawn towards this person. She is told that this is essentially the child of a family that has now been wiped out, or was just involved in a kind of nefarious movement. And so she's like, I will take you on as an apprentice, but only me, and you have to do something amazing to make me want to do that, because by the time you graduate I'll have forgotten who you are. So you need to make me remember, and you need to make me want to take you on, so you have to do something magnificent. And she's like, I will tell every other teacher, every other person that they cannot take you as a student, cannot take you as an apprentice. You are like cut off from the rest of the world, essentially, apart from me, and you have to prove yourself. And so that's kind of the setup in the opening chapter. And then from there, we then go forward, and we have kind of three central characters. Ezek, you're following their previous apprentice called Chono, who has a history with Ezek and Six and whatever's going on there. And then alongside that, there is Yun Ironway, who is this kind of master thief, master hacker, who has stolen something that Ezek and Chono are being sent to find. And so there's a kind of cat and mouse thing, but behind the whole thing there's the idea of, is Six involved? Are they just imagining it? Are they just paranoid? Are they involved? What's going on? And basically, it's such a good book. I absolutely adored it. I gave it 4.5 stars. It has, like I said, these characters are just not good people. It has really interesting world building in the sense of there's constant little nitbits of information that slowly unravel a larger story and expand the world. And the thing that's nice is sometimes when you have an opening chapter and then you jump into the story, it feels like nothing has happened in between those two things. In this, you're unraveling information between those two periods that inform where your characters are now. And I think it was expertly done that way. Alongside that, there's a good bit of humour, good bit of social commentary, and yeah, I was just riveted through the entire thing. I just really, really enjoyed reading it. It never felt a chore, it never felt other than anything but a pleasure to read these characters and experience the little plot twists and unravelings and everything. I really recommend these Burning Stars. It held up a lot. The second book I now have, I'm going to read it, I think possibly in September, because the last book comes out in November, and so I'm now preparing myself for the last book in the trilogy. It reads more like it reads more like a fantasy plot that's taking place inside of space, is how I would describe it. So if you're not a sci-fi reader, I would not feel, unnerved or anything. It's really a fantasy plot in space. Next up, I read Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. It was the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth, death, one of the two. And in the Discord, we did June Austen, or some people did. They did June Austen, where they were reading every single Jane Austen book. Me, absolutely not. Don't have time for that. All the willpower. I have read 3 Jane Austen books before. This is my 4th one. This is my least favourite so far. I prefer Of Northanger Abbey, Pride and Prejudice, and Persuasion all over it. I give this 2.5 stars. Mainly it comes down to there is the brilliance of Jane Austen filtered in here. It has its bright spots and everything, but I just wasn't. Firstly, I wasn't that interested in the characters. There's a real separation between the essentially there's the two sisters. One, hence the name Sense and Sensibility. One is more reasonable, mild-mannered and reserved. One of them is more emotive and more, just essentially described as impetuous here. When they're forced into polite society, as it's referred to, I just found that I liked one of the characters in their storylines far more than the other. And I understand that the idea of Sense and Sensibility is this breakdown that Jane Austen's exploring between romanticism and realism. It's an interesting point in history of this essentially crossroads between the two forms of kind of the pop culture at the time for literature, kind of going from the overly emotive, flamboyant element of the romanticism into the more reserved element of realism. But when you have them both in the same book, personally for me, I'm more interested in stuff actually happening. And so when you've got people who are emotive and they're pouring out emotion, they're speaking earnestly and passionately, that is much more compelling. And I was rifling through those bits and then slogging through someone be realistic and like reserved, and I was just kind of like, man, I understand the experiment, but it just personally didn't work for me. I understand that people love Sensibility as well, but in the grand scheme of all of her books, I do think it's the weakest for me. It also missed her humour. I think all of the other books I've read by her have had such clear and sharp wit. This one had very particular points of wit. One particular, my favourite line in the book, is where this lady is essentially like, she's talking about the poor guy, and they're talking about the decisions he's making, and she's like, well, he best stay poor if he's going to make terrible decisions like that. And that kind of humour, that kind of like dry cutting humour, I love from Jane Austen, and it just wasn't there as prevalently as I would have enjoyed. Next up was another Discord read, which was Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. I do not have it because it's not available to buy in Canada. I got it from the library, luckily enough. I gave this 3.25 stars. I thought it was a good book, but essentially, this is a booktube darling now, so I'm sure you've heard of it. Set during the Black Death, and it follows a kind of a knight who is now turned brigand, who is travelling with his group of guys who attempt to assault a young girl, and he stops them, and then him and this young girl travel and they meet people on the way, and it's set in kind of mainland Europe, like around Paris, that kind of area. I just thought it was a fascinating era and time frame to place a narrative, because it's such a desolate piece of history. It's truly like the Dark Ages of mainland Europe. And obviously that's juxtaposed, funnily enough, with reading A Destiny Disrupted, where the Crusades, it's like the actual reality of the Crusades going there to pillage a much richer and much more prosperous society and drag it back to mainland Europe. And it does go through similar things. Between Two Fires, it explores this darkness and this utter depravity, the abuse and the pestilence, the death, the rot, the religious overarching element to it, the idea of abandonment, the idea that like you've betrayed God and God is punishing. It goes into the cannibalism of the time, something that is also explored in Destiny Disrupted, the idea of Franks and other mainland Europeans going and descriptions of boiling babies and grilling people and all this horrific experiences that were going on. So I was loving the concept of setting something there. Otherwise, the writing, I think Christopher Buehlman has to be a big fan of The Road by Cormac McCarthy, because he is emulating that a lot. This is a very dry, not overly flowery piece of writing. This is cut and dry, prosaic, just this is what's happening, let's do it, this is it. No flamboyance, no character, it's just straight to the point. And personally, I think that really worked for the story being told. This is a dark, desolate time. It is a place, it's a time of uneducation, and as a result, people are more depraved, feral, strict people. But what didn't quite work for me in some places and it didn't others is that the book is also heavily spiritual. There is an element of Christianity is rife throughout, which is inherent because that was kind of the rallying of what happened during the Black Death was the call to crusades, the call to go and leave and pillage and destroy somewhere else, under the name of religion. And so that's there constantly, and it's represented as both pure and impure depending on the situation, and it gets a little muddy in that. But for me, there are particular scenes where the religious elements become physical, things manifest, and I thought there was a chance because the opening part, like the opening page of each part of the book, have these almost like scriptural writings about what's happening with, like, God has abandoned, God has not been seen, the devils are arriving, and that kind of thing. It goes through and writes it as if it is scripture. And I really liked the juxtaposition of that. But when we had actual physical manifestations of religious iconography, I would have really loved if the writing would have flipped as well. Because it's not like we're locked into a character's perspective. We're constantly moving between people. And I think the idea of then snapping out and experiencing, rather than through this person just being like, and then an angel battered the fuck out of this thing. And I was just kind of like, oh, okay, so we're having the whole experience told in a way that's kind of mundane, bland. I would have loved to have had this overwhelming juxtaposition between these two styles of writing and just experience the grandeur and the scriptural writing that could be had for a battle taking place like that. And then you flip back into your character to then experiencing the grounding of the aftermath of it and everything. And so, yeah, I just felt like the book was a little too long, a little too bloated, with the same style of writing that felt a little, as we got further into the book and more outlandish things were happening, I found that it was discordant with the evolution that was occurring. And instead, I think we could have had the prose elevate as the book went along to show the influence. If you want to have this idea of religion entering and that there's like things happening, that I think you could elevate the prose to then match the arrival and the implications of it. Next up, I read The Sailor on the Seas of Fate, which is in this collection, book 3 in Elric. In the actual publication order, it was book 2. And The Sailor on the Seas of Fate, I really enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars, which is the same as I gave the first book. I think essentially it's 3 separate short stories kind of thing, novellas maybe, depending on the length, that all have a theme of a nautical theme. Where you smiling over there at my incorrect speaking. Yeah, they have this nautical theme. Yeah, the beginning is that Elric, at the end of book 1, is now in a position where he doesn't really know what he's doing. People don't, like, the humans don't really want him around, and he's on this beach, and a boat rocks up, essentially. And it's like, he's like, can I get board? And he's like, they're like, what's your name? And he's like, Elric of Melniboné. And they're like, sick, you're the last person on this crew. And he's like, what? And they're like, yeah, we've been waiting for you. And he's like, I don't know who you are. And they're like, well, you're meant to be on this cruise, so I suggest you get on board. And the thing that's really interesting with Elric of Melniboné, and I know that people are going to come at me because it goes completely against what I said about Brandon Sanderson. My argument is that Elric of Melniboné is one series, and in the second book they make it very clear that what's happening, where everything's a little timey-wimey, everything's a little out of sync, they're travelling through different dimensions, all kinds of crazy things going on. And each of the 3 novellas, each of the 3 short stories are connected through what he does with this boat. And he gets on board, and it's the idea that it's like, oh, I'm the captain, but these are people who you are meant to be with them, and you're meant to complete these tasks. Don't ask us how we know this. Some of them have met before. That person's met you before, but you have never met them before. Things are happening out of chronological time order for different people. They're coming to the ship at different points in their lives from different places and different worlds. And I just thought it was such a really bright, interesting world building mechanic that lends itself to mystery, lends itself to this fantastical nature of the world that Elric takes place in. The characters are always vibrant. I really like also how Michael Moorcock writes. It feels like you're reading something from the 19th century. Or like the early 20th century. The dialogue is very respectful, very gentlemanly, that kind of vibe, cordial, and I find that also lends itself to a feeling of a fantastical nature. I actually think it's something that modern fantasy misses quite a lot, is that when you read certain fantasy that's even from like the 90s or something, they write it in a way that feels older, and that provides itself with a sense of otherworldliness, foreign to our ears and what we experience on the day-to-day level, and also lends itself to the idea of a fantastical world taking place in a more primitive time. I also, the other thing I like about Michael Moorcock is that each of the Elric books I've read so far has had a particular theme. It's the same as Le Guin, where there's particular themes inside of their books that it's not like they're just writing a book to have some fun. At least so far. The next Elric book
Books are not fun.
Books are not meant to be fun. They're meant to be chores. 100%. No, the next Elric book I've heard, like I've seen reviews and people trashed it. So I'm going to preface this by saying maybe not the whole series is going to be like this, but so far I like that each book has had a theme that they've wanted to address and hit, and I appreciate that. I always appreciate good theme work. I read an arc for a short story collection called The Dilemmas of Working Women by Fumio Yamamoto, which came out in I think 2000, has only just been translated into English now. It's an award-winning book in Japan. People like Sayaka Murata have clearly been influenced. Convenience Store Woman has to have been influenced by this book. They are very similar, or the other option is that whoever has translated this has seen the work of Jin Takamori for Convenience Store Woman and has emulated the style of translation. That's also an option. It's hard to tell without reading it in the original language, obviously. But The Dilemmas of Working Women is a series of short stories that I found interesting because it's following very complicated characters. The women that you're following, you understand and agree with their perspectives and decisions, but they're not perfect people. And I think that's so important, especially at the moment where we have, it's always been the case, but there's been a lot of things recently where the concept of a perfect victim has been something that has been investigated, where the moment there's a slight issue with a victim, it becomes something to seize on and attack. And I think this goes through it a lot, where it's the idea of like, someone could be a victim and also a bad person. That can still be the case. And I thought that it was very interesting reading this. I'm not going to go through all the short stories, obviously. I do think that if you enjoyed Convenience Store Woman, I think you'll enjoy The Dilemmas of Working Women. And vice versa, if you didn't, you won't. Because it is similar. The writing style is similar, very mundane, nothing really happens. It's just investigating these characters. Would recommend it. I thought it was very good. 4 stars. And that was it. That was my month. A successful month overall. Like, there were bright spots, like I said, but a lot of mid as well. But obviously I'm missing 2 books I don't have physically. But if you did enjoy, please do like, please do subscribe. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you're interested in them. Tell me why you like Crossroads at Twilight, if you're a little freak. And as always, have a nice rest of your day. Do you want to see my thumbnail face?
It's great.
Thanks.